Hello and welcome to Amazing Stories from the Hood. My name is Brian, and this is episode 5, entitled Do You Believe in Destiny? Part 3. When the letter that Denise wrote to Gary's mother arrived at the post office prior to its delivery to Gary's mother, it fell into the hands of the man who used to be married to her, the man who used to be Gary's stepfather. After his divorce from Gary's mother, he occupied his time by working extra hours at the post office. His ultimate intention was to spend more time around Gary's mother in the hope that they would get back together. He was very disappointed when he found out that Gary's mother had quit. And so for the past few months, he'd been working extra hours just to occupy his time. He was a man who maintained old-fashioned values. In fact, that's what attracted Gary's mother to him. He believed that when you marry someone, you marry them for life. He didn't agree or believe in divorce. So finding himself a divorcee took a heavy toll on him because of his values. But he was fortunate enough to realize the stress that his ex-wife was under at the loss of her son. And for that reason, he did not conflate the failure of his marriage as the failure of him as a husband. And so he continued to hold out that maybe they would get back together. And it was while putting in the extra hours to occupy his free time that he came across the letter mailed to Gary's mother by Denise. He knew that Gary's mother was an orphan and had no real family other than Gary and him when they were married. When he saw that it was a handwritten letter from someone, the temptation to open the letter was great, but not so great that he was willing to break the law. But it did provide him an opportunity to go visit Gary's mother himself. Because she had moved, he no longer knew her address. Now, with this letter in hand, he did. He considered the ethics, but decided to go for it anyway. While he wasn't willing to break the law, he was willing to lose his job if it meant a chance at getting back with Gary's mother. So because he was the supervisor, he gave himself the next day off and made the plans to go visit Gary's mother under the guise of delivering the letter. He realized that he had no idea what she would be doing. It had been 2 years since he had seen her last, so he made the choice to go at 9 a.m. in the event that she would be home, and he found no one answered the door. His next choice was to visit at 6 p.m. when he figured she'd be home. At 6 o'clock, he drove up and saw the lights on in the apartment and knew that she was home. He became nervous. Up until that point, it had just been a plan. But now he was about to come face to face with his ex-wife, the woman that he was still in love with. As he parked his car and got out, started walking up the walkway to the apartment door, he noticed he could see in through the living room window and that she was on the telephone at the time. Upon seeing her on the phone, he considered turning around and coming back, and he realized he was looking for any excuse to avoid having to go to the door. But the image that he had created in his mind about their reunion did not involve her being on the phone when she answered the door. But none of that really mattered, because during the time he was contemplating what to do, he didn't notice that she was approaching her own door, and just as he arrived to knock, she opened the door and stood there looking at him while on the phone with someone. He panicked. He immediately produced the letter and told her, "This came for you, just dropping it off." She stood there with a shocked look on her face, holding the phone to her ear, not looking at the letter, but looking at him. Then she said on the phone, "Denise, I'm gonna call..." And she stopped in mid-sentence because her eyes had focused on the letter, and then she fainted. In the days before Denise left to go to college, Gary's mother made it a point to keep encouraging her to go and to keep her spirits up. And then, after Denise left, the reality of being alone set in once again, and Gary's mother felt herself drifting back into depression. She did her best to fight it by working extra hours at the law firm, but when she was home alone, her memories of being married started to haunt her. The images of the man she married, now her ex-husband, began to surface. The only relief she had from it were the calls from Denise. Meanwhile, the extra work that she was putting in at the law firm got the attention of the senior partners, and while she had only recently completed training as a paralegal, they saw the benefit of training her as an assistant counsel. When the partners told her of her opportunity for advancement and the training that was required, She readily welcomed it. She thought it was perfect timing and a great way to keep her mind occupied and her time occupied so that she wouldn't have to think about the loss of Denise and her regrets from getting divorced. In a short time, she had settled into the new routine of performing her paralegal duties and afterwards training to be an assistant counsel. It kept her in the office from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m. almost every day. And while she still maintained daily contact with Denise, on some occasions she had to let Denise go to voicemail so she couldn't answer the phone. Then, on the day when the workload was particularly heavy for her as a paralegal, and she had also reached the more extensive training as an assistant counsel, by the time she got home, she was too tired and didn't even check her voicemail. The next day, she woke up late, still tired from the day before, and rushing now to be to work on time. She didn't have time to listen to her voicemail until lunch. The voicemail, as it turned out, was the voicemail from Denise telling her about the letter she sent and that she thinks she needs to come down and see if this is Gary or not. And this voicemail was already 2 days old, and she still had a full workday ahead of her. Gary's mother sought out the office manager and explained the situation. The office manager told her, "We can spare you time off if you need it, but just give us enough notice." Gary's mother then immediately requested 2 days off, but had to separately make sure she could get out of training. For that, the office manager told her she had to talk to the partners, and to do that, she had to make an appointment. Gary's mother began to get frustrated, feeling like she was about to lose it. Rather than let the frustration cost her her job, she made it a decision to go over her office manager's head and went in to see the senior partner directly. He was, after all, the member of the congregation that hired her in the first place after hearing her story. After she got finished explaining to him the continuing portions of the story, he gave her time off, said she could take as much time as she needed, and that when she returned she could continue training. Later that afternoon, the office manager approached Gary's mother and informed her that her request for time off had been approved starting the day after tomorrow, and reminded Gary's mother that she, as the office manager, had the final say on when Gary's mother didn't have to come to work as a paralegal. And so it was the next day when she got off work at 4:30 that she caught the bus and was home by 5. After she arrived home, she immediately got on the phone and made a reservation to fly down and join Denise. But it wasn't until a little while later that she was able to get Denise on the phone. Denise explained to her all the events that had taken place and the reason why she wrote them down in a letter instead of calling her immediately, and that she was aware that Gary's mother probably hadn't received the letter yet. And it was while Denise was explaining this that Gary's mother heard a sound. It was the sound of a car door closing, but she knew this sound. She was very familiar with it. She got up off the couch and walked over to the window and looked outside. Gary felt the sensation of his blood running cold. He was unable to move or speak as he looked at his mother and his stepfather standing in the office. His mind was a complete blank. Gary's mother made a weird sound, something between joy and anguish, as she ran up to him and took him in her arms. The man that he had once known as his stepfather simply stood there staring at him with a look of amazement on his face. And the last thing Gary remembered seeing before he fainted was the owner pulling out his phone. Over the next 2 days, the two couples reconnected and built stronger bonds than ever before. Gary and Denise, after realizing that having only met once when they were 12 years old and were now 17 and were never able to find anyone else that they wanted to be with, bonded over that. Gary's mother and stepfather reunited and realized how much they needed each other. But the day came when Gary's mother and soon-to-be stepfather again had to return, but Gary chose to stay and remain with Denise, who was still enrolled in college. But the date was set when Gary, mother, and stepfather were to remarry, and all made it a priority to be there for the wedding. Over the next coming months, Gary and his roommate earned their GED and continued working. Gary, through the encouragement of Denise, enrolled in college after he received his GED. Gary's mother, not long after she returned, completed the training for assistant counsel, whose one of the collateral duties in the office was human resources manager. The office found itself soon looking for a new office manager, Gary's roommate also decided to attend college and graduated in 2 years with an associate's degree in small business administration. After he graduated, the owners of the grocery store promoted him to store manager, while Gary, 2 years after that, graduated with a degree in business administration, and the owners of the grocery store made him general manager. It was after Gary graduated that he and Denise wed, and some months later that Denise became pregnant. Denise took a break from her studies. She was pursuing a PhD in sociology and decided to raise their son. They called him Gary Jr. When Gary Jr. was in the 3rd grade, his teachers recommended him for the script spelling bee contest. Gary Jr. seemed a little reluctant, so the school counselor called his parents in. While Gary and Denise sat in the meeting with the counselor expressed to them their interest in Gary Jr. being in the spelling bee contest. But they expressed that since Gary Jr. did not seem to want to do it, they called the parents in. Gary and Denise stopped and looked at each other, and then just busted out laughing. While they laughed, the school counselor looked at them, and she thought to herself how she could not understand these younger people. There was nothing funny about this, not one little bit. And that brings to an end part 3 of episode 5, entitled, Do You Believe in Destiny?